my grandparents and great-grandparents settled when they came from Austria-Hungary. They spoke German, but most of their traditions were Hungarian, and especially the foods. And you need to know right from the get-go that I am a foodie. I love food, and I love to eat food. I grew up eating viltjes kraut, and epelbita, and palachinka, and kroise, and krisnudela, and all the many, many, many strudels they were so thin you pulled them over a table. How many remember eating or have eaten strudel that way, where it's so thin, and then you fill it with all the goodies and roll it up and slather it with butter and bake it? Oh, I grew up watching my mom and my mother and her mother-in-law, my grandma, make all of that wonderful stuff for us. I grew up eating food that my girlfriends in school couldn't even pronounce, and I loved it all. Now, I'm going to tell you about my background, and it's important because it will make sense why I wrote this cookbook. My parents had a very large dairy farm. They had 5 daughters. I'm number 3. We may have had girls' names, but we worked just as hard as any boys. We worked in the fields. We worked in the barn. We did everything our dad told us to do. We picked stones, we mowed hay, we cleaned the pens, we milked the cows. We did all of that. After my 2 older sisters were gone to college, in my junior year, my dad and I milked 100 head morning and night with the stanchions yet, in the stanchions, those of you who are familiar with dairy farms. Now I tell you this because my mom never taught us how to cook, because we were always in the barn and in the field. But what she did do is she taught us how to eat. So when Art and I were first married, we had some pretty shabby meals. I didn't know how to cook, but I sure knew how to eat, and it didn't take long, and I missed that good food. So in the beginning it was a lot of trial and error, and error, and error, and trial and error, and a lot of calls to my mom because we didn't live even in the state. Now I've been a working hairdresser for 48 years now. With the salon in my home, it has allowed me to go into the kitchen, prepare a meal, set the timer, and get right back into the salon. Cooking from scratch also allows me to choose foods that are important to our family. We have some food allergies in our family. Dairy, wheat, can't have it. So I've had to be creative. And it's important that I omit chemicals and preservatives from our foods. Now I love to cook, but I also love to teach. And who I love to teach, the people that I love to teach the most are the granddaughters. The oldest granddaughter is 15, Rebecca. She makes beautiful pies now. One morning, well, she had a pie class with me. The next morning she got up early before her mother was up, and by the time Barbara came down, there were 2 pies on the counter. She'd made them before school that morning. She makes beautiful cupcakes, and little Olivia, who's only 7, is right behind her. We had a family gathering at Mary Jane's for Christmas. Olivia comes with her tray of hors d'oeuvres that she made herself. So she loves to cook too, and this really gladdens this grandma's heart. It was but maybe 3 years ago when Abby and I were cooking, and as commonly, I was just throwing the ingredients in, because that's how I cook. And Abby said to me, Grimmy, she calls me Grimmy, Grimmy, isn't this written down? And I said, no, Abby, none of these old recipes were ever written down. And then she said, well, Grimmy, how will I ever make it if you don't write it down? Well, that was like a light went off in my head. And I actually got scared. I remember thinking, holy cow, if something happens to me, these kids aren't ever going to get this stuff again. And then I knew what I had to do. In the beginning, I just measured and made and measured and made until they were, and wrote down everything for all these old recipes. And I told you some of them. Then I went into all the pies that I make and all the breads. We have never had bought bread in our house for over 40 years. I make all of that stuff, and I love to do it. I love to see how God is way ahead of us. Because once I got all of those recipes together and written up, I didn't really know what I was going to do with it. I knew that I had them all typed and organized. And I even said to the kids one day, I don't know how I'm going to get this stuff published. Well, that's where God shows himself. I think when we're on the right track, or I know when we're on the right track, the Lord's there, and he opens the door. Well, Heidi called me one day and said, Mom, I've been looking online and I found some websites that do cookbooks. One was recommended by Rachel Ray and Paula Dean. Okay, I thought, and there was my open door. So I took a look at it, and now I'm a soon-to-be 66-year-old grandmother, and not so very perfect with the computer, but I managed to navigate myself through it, and it was a great site. One of the great things that it did, it offered me an opportunity to invite other family members or anyone else. And I invited, of course, the Bungart family and daughter-in-laws and other relatives. Well, it was amazing to me how that idea just turned into something that I could have never imagined. 17 people added their wonderful recipes. We had appetizers and candies and beverages. We had Aunt Winnie's famous secret graham cracker cake recipe. She taught me how to make ingamas. My sister Betty added many recipes, one of which was her skunk repellent. I added my homemade laundry soap, which I love, by the way, and it's only a penny a load. If you listen carefully, you will hear my grandmother's voice from her kitchen, as she always asked, "You want the cookie? You know where they are?" And that line is on one of the divider pages, along with a picture of Grandma's great big sugar cookies with the raisin in the center, and that old cookie jar. This is not just an ordinary cookbook about making food to eat. This is our heritage, going all the way back to those 1890s. And among all of that history is a common thread that has weaved us all together from generation to generation to the generation, even now into the 6th generation sitting over there. But ladies, God was still ahead of me, because I must confess to you that I am not very smart. While I am a good cook and a pretty good hairdresser, and I keep a nice house, I am not good at knowing where to put a comma or a semicolon, and I'm probably a poster child for misspelled words. But you see, God already knew that, and it didn't matter at all, because our daughter-in-law, Barbara, is an English teacher. A nice girl who edited my cookbook and never once said to me how dreadful my mistakes were. And I can't thank her enough. Well, all the family bought cookbooks for themselves and their children and grandchildren, neighbors, customers, people from our church, and I thought that was it. Most of them were sold, and I figured I'm done. Well, I was wrong again. One retired teacher from Carroll bought 19 cookbooks for his Hungarian-German family. Called me the day after Christmas. It was a Monday morning, if you remember, because Christmas was on Sunday. "Carolyn, were your ears ringing yesterday?" He said, "We had the best gathering. We all sat around with the cookbook, went through it, reminisced on the similarity of the foods, the pictures, read the stories, laughed. It was just great, Carolyn." I had people calling from Detroit, Florida, Texas, and Ann Arbor wanting cookbooks. Would I send them? I never thought this was going to happen. And then I get a call from Alice Verbeek. And here I am today speaking to maybe 100 people about this cookbook, all because Abby said to me, Grimmy, how will I ever make this stuff if you don't write it down? Well, it's been overwhelming. Now I want to tell you something, and I'd like you to really listen. If you have ever even slightly entertained the idea of gathering your recipes, and I know you have them, and putting them into a cookbook, or putting your family stories or heritage to paper, do it, and do it now. I hope you will see that this isn't just about food. Family traditions are so important, especially with our modern families today. Most young people know very little about their family heritage, where they came from, the people who came before them, their stories, their struggles, and especially their victories. Sadly, many heroes today are goofy rock stars or wildly overpaid sports figures who are only ever seen maybe on the news or the stage screen or playing field. My wonderful hero, one of my wonderful heroes, was my hard-working grandmother, who was a wise overcomer with great grit, courage, love, and a tremendous faith. And she lived it every day, right in front of us. Whenever I struggle with something really difficult, there are Grandma's footsteps and her encouraging words. Caroline, she said to me one day in the hot bean field while we were hoeing. She took 4 rows. I took 1. She was pushing 70. I was maybe 10 and complaining the whole time. Caroline, she said, there are many things in life you won't want to do, many. But you must do them anyway, and they will make you strong. Well, do you know how many times those words have played back to me over my life, my adult life, when I didn't want to do something that was hard, and I was looking for a way out? You know who that lady was? She was Abigail's great-great-grandmother. Wouldn't you like to know something about your great-great-grandmother? Her victories, what made her tick, her faith? How about your great-great-grandfather? And maybe even better, wouldn't you like your great-great-grandchildren to know something about you? What's important to you, your wisdom. Grandma's been gone a long time, but her words are still alive, because they are. Her words, her determination, and her integrity, and her faith, because it's right here. So please, gather your recipes and tell your stories, or interview and write down your mom, or your dad, or your aunt, or grandma and grandpa's memories. Write them down, because those will last long after you're gone. Do it for your family and those who are not even here yet. Please don't let them or you be buried with all that treasure still inside. Ladies and gentlemen, if I can do it, you can do it. I want to thank you for this opportunity to tell my story. And I will be here afterwards if anyone would have a question or would like to purchase a cookbook. They're only $15. And I would be really honored to sign them for you. Thank you very much.